This is the ultimate period handbook because it is the guide that every woman needs to navigate the 4 seasons of her cycle. And I'm not even capping. There are 4 seasons of a cycle, which is why it makes sense to adjust your training, your nutrition, and even how you approach work according to the season that you're in. And we also need to address the fact that 90% of women suffer from PMS symptoms. And beyond that, there's like an 8% chance that you can suffer from premenstrual dysphoria/depression. So stay tuned so that you can become a lot more body literate and know exactly what you need so that life doesn't feel like an uphill battle. Today, we are going through part 2 of our series. If you haven't already, go and watch part 1 because this is where we talk about how the menstrual cycle works, how hormones affect a woman, and how to manage hormone imbalances, which are becoming very prevalent amongst the female population today. Once you've watched that, come back to this video where we're going to go through practical applications. Based on what we know in the science, how would that change the decision-making process for a woman or a coach who works with women according to the different phases of the month? We're going to start off with training, and then we're going to move into nutrition, and then address the elephant in the room, PMS and PMDD. Is there a way to improve symptoms? Then we're going to move into how to test for your hormones if you're going to get blood work done, as well as supplements that you might want to consider taking. And then work. Should a woman work differently throughout the month? Yes, and we're going to talk about how. And then lastly, this is more so for coaches. There's a lot going on in a woman's body and it can feel very overwhelming because you don't want to switch things up too rapidly to the point where you've got a different program every week. So we're going to talk about how to program intelligently without changing too many variables, okay? Training. To quickly recap, in the last video, I likened the phases of menstruation with the 4 seasons of the year, where the follicular phase is like spring, ovulation is like summer, then things slow down, in comes autumn or fall if you're American, and that is the luteal phase, and then we end with your period being winter. So using this example, we start off with the follicular phase, which is a really good time for a woman to focus on building. Really good for my strength training ladies, or even girls pushing for hypertrophy, which is just growing muscle. Go off, do not hold back, because the follicular phase brings in a surge of estrogen. We take full advantage of the beautiful protective and strengthening effects that estrogen provides. Our tendons and ligaments are much less vulnerable to injury. Our cortisol levels peak, so we feel more prepared and ready for action and to really push our sessions hard. And our glucose metabolism is much more optimized because of estrogen, which basically means we can handle carbs better and therefore get away with eating more carbs, which can therefore translate into awesome sessions that are fueled with an immediate source of energy. So what does this mean in a practical application? Firstly, do not shy away from those 1 rep maxes, aiming for say 70 to 95% of your 1 rep max for my strength girlies, pushing closer to failure on your hypertrophy sets, going to a 1 or 2 rep in reserve, or potentially even going to failure if you really feel like it. Likewise, anyone who does like CrossFit and functional or speed and agility work, go off. And then in terms of cardio, I mean, there's a few different kinds that I'm going to cover off in this video. HIIT, which is high intensity interval training, and as the name suggests, pretty high intensity. Lots of plyometrics and jumping and short but sharp spurts of intensity. Whereas LISS, which is low intensity steady state, is the kind of cardio that you can sustain for a long time, which isn't as taxing on the body. Something like going for a walk or a light jog or going on the Stairmaster or the row machine, okay? So those are the 2 kinds that I'm going to explain today. And in the follicular phase, I would say go for HIIT over LISS. If you're someone who likes doing HIIT classes and whatnot, this is a time where your ligaments and your bones are fortified. You want to take advantage of that elevated cortisol that's getting you pumped and G'd up. And because HIIT does require an immediate source of energy, aka carbohydrates, we want to take advantage of a time where our bodies are going to oxidize carbs at its best. As a woman moves into ovulation, this is like hot girl summer, okay? You're feeling good, you look great, and you're performing really great in the gym as well. And that's because you get a surge in testosterone as well as that surge in estrogen, okay? Now, testosterone is fantastic for building muscle. It's awesome to increase your competitiveness and your drive and your mental acuity and focus. So just keep doing what you were doing in the follicular phase and pushing your training hard with intensity, pushing your strength training hard as well. So closer and closer to that 1 rep max in terms of load. And likewise with your HIIT training sessions and CrossFitting for my strength girlies, the boxing girls, the CrossFitters, the girls who jump and do things that I wish I could do. Keep doing what you're doing. Fantastic. Now, as we move into the luteal phase, which is autumn, things start to slow down. And this is because estrogen and testosterone drop and progesterone starts to climb, okay? And they have like antagonist effects, okay? So firstly, the drop in estrogen makes us more susceptible to tissue damage and therefore injury. So we really want to be careful when it comes to managing heavy weights or complex movements, okay? We have less of a capacity to push hard, and that's because of a couple things. Firstly, our cortisol drops because of progesterone increasing and estrogen decreasing. When we have less cortisol, I know you might think that's a good thing because it means less stress, but cortisol is actually great to experience this preparedness, this fight flight, which is what we need when we want to push our training hard. Now, the second reason it feels harder to train is because the body switches gears in terms of what fuel source it prefers. We can burn calories and utilize energy from carbohydrates and fats. Carbs are like your immediate source of energy. Fats takes a little bit longer to oxidize and be accessed by the body. Now, because estrogen drops, our ability to access carbohydrates to use for training is hindered. And there's some behind the scenes science around how it impacts glucogenesis, which we won't talk about today. But basically, progesterone comes in, plays around with metabolism by interacting with the thyroid, and it encourages the body to optimize fat instead. Now, because of that, we may not feel as prepared to push our training hard because we don't have that immediate source of energy, okay? And alongside that, we get slower nerve reaction times. So it actually takes longer for the alpha motor neuron to contact the muscle fiber and tell it to contract. And that's why when you were ovulating and you're hitting a squat with depth and it feels like butter, but then the next week you're hitting the same squat, maybe with less weight, but all of a sudden you feel sloppy and uncoordinated and it just feels wrong, your slower nerve reaction time has a huge role to play in that. So given this context, we want to approach our training sessions trying to achieve productive sessions without working against our physiology and overworking ourselves or potentially risking injury. Now, does that mean that you have to stop strength training? Absolutely not. I just say be conservative with your numbers. Instead of that 70 to 95% of your 1RM in the follicular phase, I would say drop that maybe more to the 50 to 70%. Now, if you are a powerlifting girl who is going to compete soon, have a chat with your coach about what you can handle. And there's a lot of body literacy and insight that you need to really focus on, because there are going to be some months where you don't feel as affected in your luteal phase, and that comes down to a lot of things like how well rested you are, how well slept you are, the quality of your nutrition, your stress status. So don't take this as Bible, like, oh, luteal phase is kicked in, I have to drop all my numbers. There is an element of kind of ad hoc informed decision-making involved, and that is what I would call auto-regulation, which we'll talk about in a moment. But if you're feeling like your heavy sets are just not productive and you're risking injury, just drop it, let it go. You're better off doing less weight and more reps than vice versa. And if you do have a bit more flexibility in your program, I would suggest moving into more hypertrophy work and less strength work. Okay, hypertrophy work is great because most of the time you're gonna be locked into a machine, or you're gonna be doing an isolation exercise where it's less like systemic fatigue or overall fatigue. You're not trying to balance yourself or brace or coordinate 500 different muscles. You're literally just focusing on one muscle, and you can push that pretty hard without leaving the gym on all fours. So if you can, opt for more hypertrophy work. Now, just to elaborate a little bit on what auto-regulation is. As the name kind of suggests, you are regulating your body based on the feedback it's giving you. Now, this isn't to be confused with, I really can't be bothered training today, so I'm gonna just take it easy, okay? Pussy, yo. That's not what that is. That is going to the gym and noticing that you're puffed out much quicker, so you decide to take double the rest period between sets. Or maybe it takes you 8 reps to get to your desired intensity instead of 12 reps. So you basically tire out quicker, but you're still working to the same intensity. It could be swapping out an RDL with the barbell for a machine RDL because you're getting that external support. Likewise, instead of doing a Bulgarian with 2 dumbbells in your hand, drop one of the dumbbells and hold onto a pole instead to get that external stability. So there's a bunch of different ways that you can auto-regulate through slight variations in an exercise, dropping the intensity, or getting to the desired intensity sooner and just meeting your body where you're at. But this is something that takes time. It's a skill in and of itself, but any woman really needs to become acquainted with this process of reading her body, especially in the luteal phase, because there are going to be changes to your training and you're going to need to know how to troubleshoot on the spot. You know, having a coach is really helpful, but at the end of the day, like, you need to know how to kind of coach yourself through these things. Now, moving on to cardio. In the luteal phase, I would suggest more LISS, which is low intensity, steady state. I mean, I don't want y'all doing jumping and running and skipping and just going home feeling like you're about to blow your ankles out. Like, really honor your body, okay? And also, you might not feel as prepared because you don't have as much cortisol in your bloodstream getting you prepared for that HIIT workout. So just take the L, enjoy a nice stroll along the beach. You'll probably still burn the same amount of calories. It might just take you twice as long. And again, because we shift into optimizing fat oxidation over carbs and our insulin sensitivity drops a little bit, you're better off eating a little bit more fats. That will obviously inform the kind of training you do. You're gonna need to do training that you can sustain for a longer time, but that isn't as demanding, so that way your body has enough time to actually access the fats, transform it into ATP or energy to be used. Using fats for energy just takes longer than carbs, but the more you know. And finally, the late luteal phase / menstruation. It depends on the woman, but in my experience and all of the women that I've seen and worked with, I just don't think it's a smart idea to train the day before your period and the day of your period. It's just not honoring your body. We liken menstruation to winter. It's a time of warmth and comfort and hibernation and food. Just going and hitting up some heavy barbell work just doesn't really work in your favor. But again, every woman is different. Auto-regulate as needed. But if you're really out of it and you just don't think you're gonna have a productive session, you're better off just putting it off. Or if you do really need to train because you've got to hit your 5 days a week, I respect you girls. I would just say, like, do an upper body day instead of lower body, especially because, as we all know, you do get a little bit of lower back pain. That's because your uterus expands like 3 or 4 times the size, okay? And so there's a lot more pressure and swelling in that area. I mean, doing a barbell hip thrust on the first day of my period is just, I don't know, I used to do this and I don't know why, because it was so uncomfortable. Just take the L and do some lat pull downs, girl. Like, it's not worth it. Let's move into nutrition. So right back to the follicular phase. How should we eat? Well, I mean, I've been talking about it, so no surprise. Go for carbs. Our insulin sensitivity increases. Our body likes carbohydrates in this time. Plus, if you're training the house down, you want to eat more carbs to support that intensity, okay? Obviously, not all carbs are built the same. Like, I'd rather you go and gorge down a couple potatoes than French fries. If you do end up feeling a little bit shit after eating carbs, I just say pay attention to the quality that you're going for. Now, alongside this, our hunger levels naturally drop. And I'm pretty sure like 9 out of 10 women will feel this way coming off her period. Her appetite naturally drops. And that's actually to do with your leptin production. So leptin is your satiety hormone, okay? And it's actually elevated in this time. So it signals to the brain that you are full. What that means is it's a really freaking great time for a calorie deficit. Things feel a lot easier because you have more hunger control. So go for your calorie deficits. Don't go too aggressive, especially if you are training really hard, because then that will catch up to you later on in the cycle. So I would say the sweet spot is anywhere between like 15 and 25, 30%. I mean, unless you're pretty overweight or you've got a lot to lose, I wouldn't push it beyond that 25-30% range. Now, in terms of any vitamins or minerals to support this phase, if you're someone who's trying to get pregnant or you are experiencing late ovulation or no ovulation at all, which I spoke about in the last video, then I would suggest taking your B vitamins, vitamin C and zinc, to help strengthen the egg and strengthen the chances of the egg being released into fallopian tubes. Now, some foods that you can incorporate are things like full-fat Greek yogurt. You can have eggs, salmon, sardines, good things with omegas as well. Oysters are really good for zinc, as well as pumpkin seeds and flax seeds. Just a quick note, these seeds are pretty high in estrogen, so if you have an estrogen dominance problem, I'd probably suggest staying away from those. Next up, we have ovulation. Is where we tend to see a little bit more water retention because estrogen really peaks at this point in time. So we want to do a couple things in this phase. Firstly, we want to support the detoxification of estrogen so that it can filter through and we can usher in the luteal phase and our hormones can be balanced as progesterone picks up. And secondly, we want to aid in any fluid retention problems, just because the surge in estrogen does lead to more water retention. So hydration is really important here. Gut health is also incredibly important, especially for that detoxification process. So fiber-rich vegetables are your best friend here, as well as taking a supplement like NAC or glutathione. They are really good antioxidants to support organs, especially the liver when it comes to detoxifying estrogen. Now, in terms of this proportion of carbs to fats, this is when I'd say start switching into slightly higher fats, and it doesn't really have to be by much. That's just because when we ovulate, we tend to experience slightly erratic blood sugar levels as our metabolism kind of shifts or switches gears. Next up, luteal phase. Progesterone causes our basal metabolic rate and our body temperature to increase, which means that we actually have a greater ability to lose fat compared to other phases in the month. Now, does that mean that you should drop your calories even more if you're in a deficit? Absolutely not. In fact, I'd probably suggest the opposite. So as I'm sure you know, as you get to that 10 to 14 day mark before your period, hunger starts to increase. And that is because we are burning more as our metabolism increases. But it is still very possible to stick to your deficit. And that would just be by increasing your daily calories by 200 to 300. That won't change the percentage of the deficit you're in, assuming that you're moving the same amount. Okay, let me just quickly explain that. So if your basal metabolic rate increases by 300 calories a day, and then you eat back those 300 calories, the net change is 0. So let's say that your 20% deficit 3 weeks ago was 1900 calories, and then today in your luteal phase, you're eating 2100 or 2200 calories. That's still a 20% deficit. So what that means is you don't have to worry that you're gonna gain weight or lose progress. If your body really needs those calories and you just don't have the willpower to stick it out, eat more food. And I'm not saying go and eat a whole bunch of chocolate and chips, like go and eat a freaking meal. Add some more meat to your plate, okay? Make sure that these calories are actually of a quality source so that you're actually filling yourself rather than just eating small amounts of dopaminergic foods that don't really make a difference to your satiety levels. Now, if you are a badass bitch and you can actually withstand the hunger pangs, then that means that your 20% deficit may actually be a little bit more if you stick to the same calories month long. And this is probably when you'll start to lose a little bit more fat, because the calorie deficit is much larger. You might not feel it, but then I can guarantee once you come off your period, the water retention goes away, you will see it. Supplementation. Every single one of my clients, because they're all female, takes these 2 supplements. I am ride or die for magnesium and B6. I have been preaching these 2 supplements the entirety of the last video, and I'm gonna keep it going in this video. So just to quickly recap, B6 is a fantastic support for women because it aids in the production of progesterone, but it also aids in the production of dopamine and serotonin, okay? And this is when PMS symptoms tend to hit the worst. You tend to feel more irritable and moody, because there's a drop in serotonin and dopamine, and for some women more than others, okay? And this is why we crave more comfort foods and more chocolate, because these foods are very dopaminergic and they give us that hit of dopamine that we are craving or lacking, okay? And so taking B6 can also really aid with assisting cravings, okay? So if you're somebody who struggles with these really bad cravings and mood swings, I would suggest that you actually overload on B6 and take it every single day for a couple of months. I would say a minimum of 60 milligrams a day. Feel free to hit that like 1 gram mark as well. After the first 2 to 3 months, you can then drop the dosage and just take it in the luteal phase, so in the second half of your cycle. Magnesium. It has a host of benefits. It's very multifaceted. It is like one of the MVPs of minerals. Also assists in progesterone support. It aids in calming the body down, especially when you've been hitting the gym hard for 2 weeks. It's really good for muscle recovery as well. Also really good for cramps, okay? Magnesium is something that I take in the lead up to my period, and I take sometimes like 1 gram a day during my period because it really helps with those cramps. Although I will say, it definitely makes the period poops worse because it can act as a natural diuretic. So getting your magnesium in your food in the lead up to your period is great. So go for the seeds and nuts like pumpkin seeds, sesame seeds. Quinoa is really good. So is dark chocolate, MVP. Legumes, fish, organ meats, pumpkin, sweet potato, apples, so have you. In terms of the partitioning of carbs and fats, like it shouldn't change too much between the follicular phase and the luteal. I mean, you could do like a 30% carbs, 25% fats in the follicular phase and then switch them around as you get closer to your period. But that doesn't mean that your fats should ever drop too low throughout the entire month. I mean, as women, we really need to make sure we're supporting our hormones, and having high quality fats are crucial to that. I would also suggest timing in the day. So incorporating more carbs in and around your training, and then further away from your training, like before bed, a higher fat meal can really help to support your hormones, especially throughout the night as you're regenerating and so on. Late luteal phase / menstruation, I would just say honor your body if it needs that extra food, aiming for quality sources. Although if you do want to indulge in some comfort food, I don't see any issues in that. As long as it's an informed decision, don't associate any guilt with it. And yeah, really focusing on antioxidant foods alongside what you're eating. So berries are really good for that, as well as dark chocolate. As I mentioned, is actually a reason why women crave dark chocolate on their periods, and that is why. And again, continuing to take B6 and magnesium in the highest doses around this time. PMS and PMDD. So I just want to start off by saying that PMS, or premenstrual syndrome, is a spectrum. It does affect 90% of women, but to more or less degrees of severity depending on the woman and depending on the month, you know. So there's a difference between what is normal and what isn't. There is an element of inevitability in terms of symptoms of hormonal fluctuations and structural changes as the uterus expands, and you're gonna get some pain, like that's kind of normal. But I'm sure if you're a woman or you have interacted with a woman, so pretty much everyone watching this video, unless you're some sort of monk from the Himalayas, you'll have noticed that some months are worse than others. And that's always a sign that there's something going on that we need to address. The PMS symptoms typically start off in the luteal phase, so in the couple of weeks before your period, and they tend to kind of let go and move on a couple days after your bleed starts as estrogen picks up again. Symptoms. So let's quickly run through them. Tender breasts, pain in the abdomen or back, constipation, diarrhea, bloating, nausea, gassiness, cramping, excessive hunger or no appetite at all, fatigue, acne, depression, anxiety. I am spitting bars over here. Shall I continue? Okay, we've got headache, insomnia, irritability, lack of concentration, brain fog, moodiness, weight gain, crying spells, panic attacks, and social withdrawal. For example, like with me, if I've had an extremely bad period, aka I'm not able to function, I can't leave my bed, I have really bad depressive thoughts, horrible skin or cramps, I know I have to look at the last month, okay? I always say this to my clients, your period is like your health scorecard. If you failed in the month, you need to take a look at what you were or weren't doing. So for me, like my biggest problems are skin. Like I break out so badly right before my period with hormonal acne. Last year when I got COVID, it just really messed everything up for me. I really hope I don't get blocked on YouTube for saying that. Anyway, so I have to make sure my diet is on point. I have to make sure my stress is very low. I have to make sure I'm getting like at least 9 hours of sleep a night. If I don't do these things, I may be able to get away with it for a month, but it doesn't last that long, okay? And then eventually it does catch up with me. And again, this is where body literacy is so important. I think that's like the main theme throughout these videos is just becoming acquainted with your body and learning how to read the signs, not just accept things as they are and, oh, well, I don't really know why. Like, no, there's always a reason. You've just got to find it, and you just have to be really in tune with your environment and your mental status and your physical status. So let's move into PMDD. I personally, and look, I might be wrong, but I just don't think that's normal. I don't think that it happens randomly. Like, yeah, you might be predisposed to it genetically or susceptible to it in a certain condition or situation in your life, but I think that it has to have a cause. Like, that's science, you know, we don't just believe things happen out of nowhere. There's a root cause, okay? And it could be because of, you know, estrogen dominance or low progesterone, like we spoke about, balancing hormones. It could be a mental health problem that is flaring up around your period. It could be PCOS or endometriosis, a thyroid or metabolic condition. It could be even like breast implant illness or having something foreign in your body like the copper IUD and your body's rejecting it and responding in a certain way. It could be chronic stress or chronic cortisol release. This is a controversial take, but it could also be trauma related. The body really does keep the score. You could have some unconscious, repressed or suppressed memory, like a sexual, physical, or psychological childhood trauma that manifests in the body as a physical pain rather than a psychological pain. You gotta work your shit out, man. You gotta go and heal. You gotta go figure it out. So there's a variety of reasons as to why PMDD could happen. And again, it's just up to you to be curious about yourself, figure yourself out, and go and investigate, like really trust your gut here. And if you happen to be one of the many women I know who were affected by the cough or the needle that administers something that supposedly reduces your chances of getting the cough, yeah, we know that that messes up cycles and it can really screw a woman's reproduction. So holistic healing is gonna be your best friend here as well. Testing. So you're at a point now where you have soaked up all of the information I have provided you like a sponge. You are ready and empowered to make a change and suss your hormones out and get to the root of what's going on, right? You need to make sure that you're getting tested at the right time and for the right things. So general rule of thumb is your estradiol or estrogen and FSH will be tested together. And that's best done about a couple days from ovulation, like close to ovulation. And you're gonna know when you ovulate depending on your body temperature. It should increase or it should be about to increase. You could also look at your average cycle length, just looking at when you know roughly you get your period. You could also look at your vaginal mucosa, okay? It should be a little bit milkier, thicker, more viscous. I go into more detail about how you can predict where you are in your cycle in the last video where I speak about the fertile window. Moving into the progesterone and LH test, okay? So if you want to test for those, the best time would be about 5 to 7 days post ovulation, which would be, I think, like day 21 if you have a 28-day cycle. So just a few things to keep note of, because I doubt that your GP would tell you this. Now, one thing that I haven't mentioned yet is, even with the right training and nutrition and all the right supplements, a part of being a woman sometimes is just accepting what your capacity is in every stage and just learning to work with it rather than fight against it. That comes down to the way that I work and socialize and structure my months. Now, I'm very fortunate. I run my own business. I don't have a 9 to 5. I'm the damn boss of my own life, and I can make my schedule the perfect rubric for how I want to live. And what I mean by that is, like, right after I ovulate, I know I ain't gonna wanna see nobody. My motivation's gonna be very low. And so I construct themes in every week. So right after I finish my period up until when I ovulate, this is a time of great creativity and productivity. I am in grind mode. And it's also a time where I'm a lot more social. I'm very bubbly. I have a lot of energy, right? I mean, you think this is something that I can sustain month long? I wish. So this is when I am writing scripts and researching for YouTube or filming YouTube. This is when I'm writing my weekly newsletters, which I'm gonna plug later on, just so you know. This is when I am coming up with new ideas for my business, and I'm really focusing on growing it. Now, as I move into the luteal phase, naturally things slow down. This is a time where I'd prefer to do a little bit more studying, where I'm just listening to something and writing notes rather than actively applying myself. It's a time for admin that I tend to put off all the time, reviewing scripts and planning things that I've kind of already done most of the work for already. I don't really see many people in that time. I mean, I don't want to be showing up all puffy and pimply and pre-annoyed. Like, ain't nobody got to see that. I like this version of me. This is the only version people are gonna see. And I just accept the fact that I'ma have to take a day off every month. And that day is usually the day right before my period, that culmination of all the hormones where I just spend the day in bed. Like, I'm gonna be real, I don't get much done. Yo, company culture needs to get with the times. If there's one thing that corporations need to understand, it's that their female employees are not exaggerating or being lazy when they say they need to take the day off or work from home. And they need to stop expecting that women are going to be able to perform at the same output consistently as their male employees. I mean, if companies want their women to excel and want their female employees to truly feel valued and cared for, and therefore increase the retention of their employees, then they would give them the opportunity to design their ideal work schedule and have a rostered day off every month just for being a woman. I mean, if you think about it, you could really optimize your work, like all the tasks you have to do around the month. 2 weeks of the month, it's a time for focus, creativity, energy, output, meetings, presentations. Second half of the month, take more days working from home, more teamwork and collaboration, admin and reflection. And yo, I know it may seem impractical just because it's a foreign concept, but everything would get done and at a much higher quality standard. I mean, I'm pretty sure you could make an agile framework for that. Instead of sprints, you got cycles. And look, if governments really wanted more taxpayers by using feminism to convince women it's empowering to work as much as a man, then they would be far better employees and much more profitable for the economy if women stopped subscribing to a man's 24-hour hormone cycle and instead learned to work with their physiology. Take that soundbite and show it to your boss. And that's as spicy as it's gonna get today. Very last thing that we need to touch on. This is for coaches, health coaches, strength coaches, hypertrophy coaches. How do you work with your clients, your female clients? Okay, so firstly, we don't want to ambush them with changing up everything every single week, okay? It's probably not a good way to go about it. That's like paralysis by analysis. So here are a few simple guiding principles that have personally worked really well for me. Step 1. When writing programs, 4 weeks is not enough, because let's just be real here, there's gonna be that 1 week that's a write-off. So I think it's smarter to lengthen the duration of your programs. Personally, I do 12 weeks. And then if a client comes to me and says, by week 8, yo, I'm sick of the program, we can switch it up. But I just factor in at least 2 weeks where performance is not going to be the same because a woman is constantly changing. Another really good way to measure progress and a great way to teach your girls how to put things in perspective is comparing week 1 to week 5, which means you're comparing follicular phase of month 1 to follicular phase of month 2. And likewise, you can compare week 2 to week 6 and so on and so forth. So that way the variables are the same. And then if your client's numbers are going up, that means they're progressing, even when they're in the same conditions. Second guiding principle, teach your female clients how to auto-regulate. Actually, teach all your clients how to, but especially women. You know, if you're a strength coach especially, this is gonna come in handy when women don't know how to troubleshoot the days where barbell work is just not giving. So go back to the training section of this video where I actually explain what auto-regulation is and how to apply it. But this is something that you can't really do for someone else, but you can teach. Next up is to really know your client. And you know, programming as a coach becomes more and more specific and more effective as you build up that coach-client relationship. So my clients tend to have a very generic, almost similar program at the start, but then by the time with 2 months in, 3 months in, 4 months in, I really know what works well for the client, not just from a programming perspective, but also for nutrition protocols. So I know which girls have the pain tolerance and the discipline and the schedule allotment to push 4 sessions a week, even the week before their period. Whereas there are some other girls that they don't have the personality for that, and that's okay. If they can sustain 3 training days a week, every week of the month, stick to that. Or you could put in an optional workout, like maybe it's upper body or maybe it's a full body session that they can choose to skip the week of their period if push comes to shove. Likewise, allowing for more flexible nutrition targets, so allowing for a couple of high fat days or high calorie days for your girls that are in a deficit and need that extra support. Treat it as a refeed day, something to look forward to every month. So really knowing your client is going to help you manage how they feel throughout the month. Don't worry about this whole seed cycling bullshit that you may have seen on a lot of holistic pages. I mean, women are not birds, okay? You don't need to eat different seeds in every week of the month. Sure, there's some health benefits, but like, let's be practical here, okay? One thing I will say is make sure your girls are taking B6 and magnesium, especially the ones who have severe PMS and PMDD symptoms. I would suggest that they overload on it for at least a couple of months, and then you can taper that down. And that is it. So that was a very comprehensive deep dive into all things menstrual cycle. I know that this was quite a lot over the span of 2 videos, but if you've made it this far, I commend you. And just one final note that I kind of want to leave things on is I really like to think, well, I didn't come up with this myself, but something I heard that I like is that the sun and the moon represent male and female hormone cycles. So the sun essentially has a 24-hour cycle where it rises and sets at the same times every day, which is kind of like a man. Like he has his peak testosterone and all of his hormones fluctuate at the same cadence every single day. Whereas the moon has a 28-day cycle. And so that is very similar to a woman, and we really mimic that. I think it's kind of beautiful that we mimic the patterns that the universe has. I think it's a testament to God's ingenuity? Genius. Let's just call it genius. God is a genius. And one last thing before I let you go, I have a free ebook download that you can get today. This is like the culmination of all of my experience and studies in terms of how to manage training and nutrition. If you are a blank slate or you're just overwhelmed by all the information out there that tends to be conflicting, get this ebook. It's literally free coaching. I'm not even capping. Like, this is what elite coaches would prescribe to their clients. Everything to do with cutting, bulking, improving your metabolism, how to actually make gains, how to structure a program, what are some key things to think about when you're actually in the gym. All of this is in this free ebook for you to download. So if you want access to that, I will link it in the description box below. Happy reading, and I will see you next week for a fun video. Bye.